Cool,
well,
guys.
I think stuff like like Brexit and the asylum stuff and all of this is like good examples of like the Tories basically butting up against the limits of possibility. And so but they're so ideologically committed to doing things that won't work. Not even that won't work in terms of like making this country a better place to live, but also in terms of just like being literally possible. Like the way in which it's like, oh yeah, well, we'll just stop asylum seekers coming to this country. And it's like, well, fucking good luck with that, because they're going to come.
Also, like, I think a great example of what you've just described of like, there is a point at which reality intervenes.
Yeah.
And that is Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss and their budget and the stupid shit they pulled. And then that like basically down-rating Britain's creditworthiness in international markets, and it's like, what do you think's going to happen, guys?
That had to be the most thick of it moment.
I mean, I was thinking, I hate saying it, but yeah, I can only imagine like, you know, those kind of conversations taking place in someone as dumb as Liz Truss's office about like, you know, basically like we're going to be like, our sovereign debt is going to be downgraded in terms of its creditworthiness. Like, yeah, that could be that's an issue. That's a bit of a thing we're going to have to deal with.
And the thick of it is such a product of like the new Labour administration, and like you can very much see a kind of like it's very much like satirizing a kind of new Labour ideology more than it is a Tory one. Although you do get I think the Tories get in the final season, so you get this kind of where like Labour in opposition, you get the Tories, and I think you see a bit of the Tories as the series goes on, like the shadow ministers and stuff. But despite that, it still does capture this kind of like fundamental thing about British politics, which is I think the sort of like the humiliation aspect of all British politics. I think like an extremely thick of it moment would be fucking Matt Hancock being interrogated by Piers Morgan about his caramel waffle.
Yeah, he's the health minister, but he's having a stroke waffle, and it's like, that's not. Yeah, you're like, well, how can you be the health minister and set this example for children that it's okay to eat sweets? And it's like, well.
Can you imagine like a member of the US cabinet being interrogated by like Anderson Cooper about like a snack that he was eating off camera? Like it would be like insane.
I mean, I think you're doing Anderson Cooper dirty by comparing him with Piers Morgan, but
I don't know. I was like, who's an American news host I can think of? Wolf Blitzer. There were others.
Yeah,
Wolf Blitzer, the guy who invented blending a wolf.
Yeah, Wolf Blitzer has to like be educated on what the concept. Like he's like, no, I'm so man on the street, I refuse to know what a candy bar is. Hey, you have to explain to me what the concept of a sweet treat is before I can even think about it. Yeah, Wolf Blitzer's famous approach is that he's like, I want to be like the man on the street, and that's why I refuse to do any research or read anything about the stuff. And so he just asks the dumbest questions on earth because that's his whole thing.
What is a Butterfinger? Explain it to me. From first principles.
Yeah. Oh man, I haven't had Butterfinger in a really long time. Forgot about those. They're good.
Yeah, I can't remember.
I'm not really a big candy person myself, but yeah, Butterfinger is good American snacks there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they are quite tasty.
So
I'll say that.
Trying to think as watching this how I felt, and it was just like, I do think that there's a degree to which the thick of it, I think captures like the sort of synopsis, the sort of scenarios they're in. There's a way in which like translating this into Veep makes sense, and the kind of dumb American scandals and dumb American sort of like media gaffes and things along those lines. But I think like, for example, what he's just describing, that like someone in their department, you know, wiped a hard drive, and that hard drive had all of the immigration arrivals data for the last 6 months or 7 months. So they have no idea who's arrived in the country. That to me is something that strikes me as such a very plausible British thing.
Yeah, it might as well be a documentary at that point. It basically did happen.
I mean, with Windrush, it's different because with Windrush, that was they love giving themselves plausible deniability that it was unintentional, but it's so obviously fucking intentional. It's like, oh, we decided for austerity budget cutting reasons, we have to decommission some archives, and we happen to, these archives we decommissioned happen to be the ones holding all of the landing cards, the paper landing card records of immigration arrivals from the United Kingdom from about 1945 to about 1975. It's like just in the time when you would have had, you know, people who were British citizens or British subjects back in the era when, you know, there was mass migration to this country. And basically it ends right around the time when, between the Rivers of Blood speech and then stuff that Ted Heath and fucking Jim Callahan and God, what's his name? I'm losing my mind here, but Harold Wilson, those governments basically enacted laws that made it a lot harder. Like that was sort of the initial tightening. And then post-Thatcher, they literally got rid of birthright citizenship. So the people who would be targeted, who would be vulnerable in terms of like their status not being regularized because it was easier to come here.
Yeah. It's an amazing coincidence, isn't it?
Weird. I mean, I think I've told this story before, but it bears repeating that I remember, and like, I'm not saying this in praise because I don't really, I hate, I appreciate that Windrush was made a thing, that they publicized it and they took these people's side because what happened to them was horrific. I'm not a particularly big fan of the idea that we sell Amelia Gentleman as like this fucking intrepid reporter when it's like, yeah, you're also married to Boris Johnson's brother. So like, why don't you just fucking ask him? Maybe he can solve it. Like the level of like in the corridor of power already, but I'm holding power to account somehow. And also like somehow
I'm getting married to a gentleman.
Things are not, like the compensation scheme is fucked and like it's very little money and people are constantly having to fight for it. Like it's a lot of it it's annoying. But one thing that I did appreciate from this, and I believe it was her reporting, but it might have been someone else, like follow-on stories, was that in 2018, 2019 or so, when like the peak of the reporting was happening, it was determined that they had found exactly one white person that this had applied to who had gotten caught in Windrush.
Yeah,
the one single
exception.
She was Canadian. And she didn't have her passport from 1967 that had a leave to remain stamp in it because when she came in on I believe a British subject it was either a Commonwealth passport for Canada or whatever the fuck kind of document it was. So she lived in like I think the North or in the Midlands, and she spoke with a asylum rights charity, and they helped her, and they were actually able to query because her passport hadn't been destroyed.
Okay.
Like when it had been turned over or whatever, because back in those days, I guess you didn't get your passports back, or they had a record of that passport.
Yeah.
They had some record of the passport, and they found the stamp, and so she was actually able to remain in the country. But that was the only white person caught in that. And it's like, fucking coincidence. Once again, It's like, wow, Alistair Campbell, what do you think makes people cynical about politics in the United Kingdom?
Yeah.
Well, is it this? Is it a show being a little bit rude?
Yeah.
Or is it no one went to jail for this? No one lost their job for this? But people were deported to countries they hadn't been to since they were infants, or they were deported to, like they were on holiday or visiting family or like literally attending funerals of family members and had their passports canceled. They were murdered in like petty crime shit in fucking, places where they didn't have any family support network and they didn't have any money because like everything about their life was in Britain. Like,
oh yeah, well, people who were like denied medical treatment,
people
and
who died of
stuff.
cancer because they weren't able to get fucking cancer treatment from the NHS because they decided, I've never, ever been asked to present ID or proof of immigration status for NHS treatment, ever. And like, listen to me fucking talk. Is it just assumed like, oh yeah, this guy must be a British citizen. He must be entitled to it.
Yeah.
Come on. Never, not once.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like that whole thing happened. And then it's like, oh yeah. So in that regard, bringing it back to the topic of this episode, the idea of the like, this sort of thing happening for either like nefarious or also in this case, low rent reasons is believable.
Yeah,
believable.
And I think that, the thick of it is kind of like, in terms of a satire, it has its own style, which is the sense that it's about like incompetence and panic and like it's heavily about sort of media management and that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of British politics is media management. So that resonates quite well because, there's that bit, I can't remember if it's in the episode that we watched because I went on to watch a bunch of others because I went on a thick of it kick, but it's like, I think it's from another episode that I watched, but there's a bit where he's asking the government minister to resign and he's like, well, we think you're doing a good job, but it's just like bad headlines about you every day. And he's like, oh, also you need to call the papers and say that you're resigning for personal reasons because the papers want to run a story about how the prime minister's going to sack you because of press pressure. And he's like, well, I wonder how they got that impression.
It's funny because this will happen that even if you're encountering something that's like politically you find it not your style or you find it cloying or irritating, you can have moments where the dialogue, the writing, the pacing are just really good. Like I think with Armando Iannucci's stuff in general, I find that to be the case, that even if like I find it annoying, oftentimes like there are bits of the writing that are great and typically the actors are excellent. In this, Peter Capaldi's great. In the Loop, James Gandolfini and Peter Capaldi, great. In Death of Stalin, basically the whole cast, great.
Yeah, giving Zhukov a Yorkshire accent. What a vibe.
I mean, it's a fun movie, but politically, it's got some issues. I would say historically got some issues. I will mention this though, because I'll even give credit to the dark prince of annoying lib shit in America. Fucking Aaron Sorkin.
Yeah.
Remember years ago we watched the movie where the ending credits have a plane noise to suggest 9/11 is going to happen. We watched Charlie Wilson's War. Remember Charlie Wilson's War?
Yeah.
But that's a fun movie in terms of pacing. It's funny. It's politically fucking brain dead, but it's got some of those kind of things that make it entertaining. You know,
I'm just a man from Texas who hates communism.
I just love cocaine and hookers.
Yeah,
that's Bill Clinton. I don't think Bill Clinton can do cocaine anymore because of his quadruple bypass surgery. I say anymore because libel law is different in America.
Oh, okay.
What I would say though is
you get sucked off in Afghanistan